everybody, welcome back to Young and Wifed Up. This is Marcella.
And I'm Gabby.
And thanks for joining us today for another episode.
Before we get into today's topic, I want to talk to you guys quickly about our Patreon subscription. If you'd like to support our podcast and help us to continue to make content for you all, head to our Patreon page. It is patreon.com/youngandwifedup. And I also have the link in the description for you. And you can choose different tiers to do different, essentially, like you can unlock different content tiers. Sorry. Content tiers, and each tier has different benefits. The top tier includes a monthly video chat with us. So if you would like to have a more exclusive community and see a lot of the extra stuff we're doing with bonus episodes and blog posts and stuff like that, head to our Patreon.
Another way to get plugged into the Young and Wifed Up community is by joining our Facebook group. We post about topics such as homemaking and motherhood and being a wife and everything that encompasses that stuff. There's also opportunities if you have like a small business to promo yourself on the Facebook group. We have prayer request threads. We have polls. There's just a lot going on in the group, and it's also a great way to meet other like-minded women. So that's another way to also get plugged in.
Awesome. Well, I am so excited to be recording with you again, Marcella. Even though it was only 1 month of your absence, it was so sad for you not to be with me. But our mom hopped in and she did 2 episodes with me. So if you haven't already listened to those episodes, there are 2 parts, and it's called Living Contrary to Cultural Norms. And it was really fun to record with my mom. So if you haven't gone and listened to her and all of her wisdom and her personal stories and testimonies, go listen to those episodes, and you kind of get a look into our upbringing in a very personal way, because we talk a lot about our childhood, a lot of the parenting decisions my parents made that were countercultural even at their time and even now. And my mom just gives a lot of good advice if you're struggling with those situations in your own family and your own community. She gives a lot of good advice and wisdom, but there's nothing like recording with my sister. I'm so glad that she's back, and we missed you. And we have some awesome episodes planned for you guys this month. And today we are getting into the topic that might be a little bit controversial, might be stepping on people's toes a little bit, but I feel like it's something that both her and I have been thinking about a whole lot more, even just recently. And I think it's something that we should all consider, even if you don't agree, or if you maybe don't completely understand like why we're talking about this or why it's any of our business what you do. I think that all of us could take a second to really examine ourselves of why we are okay with creating our children's digital footprints. So let's get into the topic. Before we get into like the nitty-gritty, can you define for us, Marcella, what a digital footprint is?
I mean, essentially, a digital footprint is any content that you've shared online. It could be private information, things like, I think when we think of like private information online, we think of like banking information and our like personal address and like things that you would put in kind of like just data stuff. But it can also include, obviously, things that you share on social media, photos, videos, thoughts, ideas, like anything that you put online is your digital footprint. I can't really think of
no, that's great.
Better way to describe it.
Yeah, it's like essentially like the word describes like footprint. So when you're walking and you leave footprints, a lot of the times, if it's depending on where you're walking, it can sometimes be permanent. And in the online sphere, the footprints are permanent. And that's something that I think differentiates our regular footprints and our digital footprints. So how our generation, so you and me, Marcella, and our peers, how our digital footprints were created were by us, because I think our generation was truly the guinea pigs of social media, of creating online content, of sharing a lot of your personal lives on the internet. And when we were teenagers, even young teenagers, we were creating our own digital footprints by joining social media accounts, by maybe having blog posts or writing blogs, creating websites, online gaming, anything that you could think of that we were involved in at a young age. Our parents were not creating those things for us. Our generation was kind of like the guinea pig, the first ones that had access to online creativity or online personification, and now being an influencer or having an online presence is very normal. It's a part of our everyday lives. It was not as normal, and it was very, very low key even before our generation. The online presence was mostly like information. I know that my parents talk about how they had like AOL, they had some instant messaging in the 90s, early 2000s. But even then, like, those private chat rooms and stuff, a lot of that stuff is not like permanent in the permanent space like it is now with the stuff that we are putting out there on the internet. So since we had basically full control over our digital footprints when we were young teenagers, our generation, how is our children's, the next generation's digital footprints being creative right now? Marcella, can you answer that question?
Well, it's created by us because obviously, an infant, a toddler with somewhat normative motor skills and stuff cannot like create their own social media content. They can't share information in the way that us adults can. And so we are the ones that are creating the digital footprint for them. So us as parents, family members, if you have friends with little children sharing stuff about, their kids, if you're a teacher, which I think probably has a lot more legal
access.
implications.
Yeah. Yes.
But yeah, they don't really have really any control over it, especially when they're like so young and cannot communicate, or we can't like expect for children to understand and like make the decisions and fully comprehending what the implications are of sharing content about them. And I think we'll probably get into that.
Yeah. So one reason that I really felt kind of a fire under my feet of that we need to talk about this issue is because there are so many children of family vloggers who are now aging out of, being minors. They're now turning 18, they're in their late teens, early 20s. And they were also guinea pigs, of being family vloggers or, not having a choice of what their digital footprint was being made. And you see the consequences of just look it up, like ex family vlogger, child of family vlog. You can find so much right now on the internet of people talking about the consequences of their privacy as a child being like, and their family, thinking, this is just a good thing for our family. It's the way that we're making money. Our children are a part of our content, and maybe thinking it was very innocent, but then forgetting that that child will become an adult someday and they had no choice in the matter. And this is, again, we are the first generation of this ever happening. So we now are learning so much more about what those consequences could be so that we can make those informed choices. And that's what I really want everybody to take home today is like making an informed choice of what we are going to be putting in on the internet regarding our children, especially public accounts.
Mhm.
Because if we are ignorant to maybe like the dangers or the consequences, then of course, like, I'm not going to, berate anybody over that. But if we
Mhm.
now know the information, we have the information of what the possible consequences are, and we have no guardrails or no boundaries or any awareness of how this could possibly affect our children in the future, then we really need to consider that. And so that's such a big reason. I feel like we talk a lot about internet safety in our circles, in Christian circles, homeschool circles, or, family circles. And we're learning a lot about exposure to pornography and pedophilia and a lot of things that are really scary. And we talk a lot about internet safety regarding like, how do we help our kids to deal with, media and stuff like that. But we don't really talk about as much our responsibility of what we're putting out there that could
Yeah.
be compromising our children's privacy or like their vulnerability, as children. And we forget that we play a part in it. It's not just what do you do with your teenager when you give them a phone, even though those things are super important. And I'm so about, being informed as a parent and knowing what to do with those things in life that we feel like we have no control over with media and stuff. And I can talk about that all day long, but I feel like this topic of what we're deciding to post or to put out online, we don't think about the consequences as much of like, oh, well, I'll get there when my kid's old enough to look at a phone or a tablet or, when they're watching movies and I have to think about that. But we don't think as much about posting our children or talking about things that happened with our children publicly for others to see. So I've mentioned that there may be consequences, and I'm not saying that this will always be the case, but there are consequences that could happen if we are beginning our children's digital footprint without guardrails and boundaries. So, can you read off some of these, Marcel, and then I'll kind of jump in and read the rest?
Yeah. Um, so obviously the first most obvious one is that they are kids when we post about them. They obviously have a lack of control over what exactly is being shared and who it's being shared with. So they may end up growing up with a digital presence that they had no say in creating. And it can lead to a lack of control over their online identity. And I think sometimes, like, especially when we have very, very small children, we can be a bit distance from reality because we feel like, well, any implications that it could have is so far away, like years from now. Like, let's say it could affect, something in their peer circle or job situations. And we're just like, well, that's not until they're like adults. Like, by then, who's going to remember this stuff? And I think we cannot be that ignorant and naive to think that everybody on the internet has pure intent. And I think it's gotten even more ruthless now these days. Like, I know you guys know what I'm talking about. Like, people are crazy. People are
Yeah.
crazy on the internet. Like, there are things that I would not even subject myself to being an adult.
Mhm.
Like, why would I, you know, do that to my child? So that's kind of one aspect. Also, there's like privacy concerns, like information shared really early on obviously can be permanent and accessible to a very wide audience, and it can potentially compromise their privacy, excuse me, and their safety. Um, and like I said, like the future implications of even when there's so little, and we think that it could really not affect anything important later on in their life, but content shared like without consent like could impact their future opportunities like college admissions, job prospects, personal relationships, like I was talking about before. Um, And we can't tell the future of what exactly those implications are. And so I think it is just better for them to err on the side of caution. Also, things like cyberbullying and harassment, like things that we've all, I think the majority of us have been bullied at some point in our upbringing.
Yeah.
Mostly by people that, were in our circle, we knew personally, we saw, on an everyday, weekly basis maybe, or whatever it was. But cyberbullying, it just like takes it up a whole other notch, because now you're subjecting yourself to the opinions and perspectives of millions and millions of people, not knowing who's going to see what and when. And early digital footprints, I think, can definitely make children vulnerable to cyberbullying, harassment, identity theft, all those sorts of things. Also, digital permanence, like we've been saying, like content shared online can be very, very, very challenging, if not impossible, to remove completely off of the online sphere. So like that can also lead to a lot of long-term consequences. Even if their preferences change, like as they get older. And also, like I was saying, so in some cases, it can like lead to a lot of legal issues, like sharing children's information without consent, especially like regarding data protection and privacy laws and things like that. Like that can get really dicey in some areas, depending on who's sharing and what they're sharing and that sort of thing. And people, kind of being ignorant, not thinking about things like that, especially when it comes to where you're employed. Or I think people are now a little bit more aware, because there have been things that have come up of people in their job sharing things about kids at their place of work and like things like that. And like you are not allowed to like share, stuff about minors that you're working with and like things like that. So I think people now are a bit more cautious when it comes to that sort of thing. But we just can't possibly know like all the ins and outs of all that. So I think still it is better to err on the side of caution. So
yeah, one thing that I didn't add to this list of consequences, which I kind of hinted at it earlier, is that there is a lot of things coming out right now, especially if you've been on TikTok at all and seeing this controversy with an account where she's posting her little girl in compromising positions, and she's a toddler and she's, wearing scantily clad clothing, and that there are millions of men, adult, old men watching, saving. We need to, that's an aspect that I didn't want to go super in depth in, because I feel like, that's not really the point of this conversation, because there are so many other situations that we may think are more innocent that we don't consider as like an invasion of privacy, or, putting your child, like showing your child in a vulnerable state. But that is something that we need to think about, when we are posting our children online, being aware of what are they wearing, what are they doing, who is watching, who can see this, can this be downloaded, can this be shared? And so that sort of thing, I think I've seen a lot of people that feel very strongly about the scariest side of, posting our children online. That's the scariest side. I think that's the darkest side of this conversation. But on the flip side, there's a lot of things that we don't consider, like sharing or posting about embarrassing moments or meltdowns, videos or pictures of meltdowns, and people, like children in other vulnerable situations, like, they're growing up and they're struggling, and maybe you have disciplinary issues. And I'm going to add this, I'm going to talk about this when we talk about action steps, but even if you have the intent of, well, this is for an educational purpose, you are still exposing that child to
Mhm.
ridicule, to comments, to
Mhm.
like you are exposing a vulnerable moment that you wouldn't want yourself. Like do you want your moments of panic or of sin, you know,
Mhm.
plastered all over the internet? Why do
Mhm.
we think it's okay for us to do that of our children? You know,
Mhm.
and they don't even have a choice in that matter. And people can say, oh, it's just to share, to encourage other moms that times are hard and this is just authentic or real, or,
Mhm.
without realizing that we are exposing our children to ridicule and to hateful comments, or even just like that is an invasion of privacy. Like when
Mhm.
we were little, like there was no fear in my mind that if I was throwing a fit or having a hard day that my mom was going to be there with a video camera, ready to post it for potentially thousands or millions of people to see. But
Yeah.
now that is a true thing that people
Mhm.
have to worry about. And that and
Yeah.
that that does not create a good, healthy relationship, especially wanting to discipline your children and bring them up in the fear and admonition of the Lord. And I just feel like that's something I see a lot of now in the name of authenticity, or, relatable mom content, of showing like, oh, how dirty my children's bedroom is, and or oh, how pictures of them sitting on the toilet struggling with potty train, and posting these vulnerable moments for all of us to see. And if I saw it just randomly on my feed, how, and I'm not even looking for that kind of stuff, like how many more people are seeing
Mhm.
these vulnerable moments. So I think that's a consequence that we really need to take and consider. It does not build trust, trusting, loving relationship between parent and child. And also, if you're not a parent like me, I'm not a parent yet, but I have had in my entire adult life children entrusted to my care, even short term or long term. And that's something that I wish even earlier on, when I was a younger adult and I had an online presence, I wish that I was more cautious of how I was, posting kids that I was working with or telling their stories and stuff like that. Things that I thought were funny, that I see in my Facebook memories, and I'm like, oh man, I shouldn't have said that.
Mhm.
That was an embarrassing moment, a sad moment, or something really like that was like a really that was unkind of me to do to that child, even if I didn't post their name. Um, Anyway, so we talked about the consequences, but it doesn't mean that there's nothing that we can do about it. And it doesn't mean, and one thing I want to encourage you, if you're listening to this and you're like, oh, great, they're going to tell me I can never post a picture or share a picture online of my child and they're going to judge me. Absolutely not. I don't think that you have to do all or nothing, or that sort of thing. There are ways that we can be really cautious, set guardrails, set boundaries. You can just straight up choose to never post your child on the internet, and I feel like in hindsight that might be the safest option if you want to avoid any of these consequences at all. But I know, and I see myself, like, you're with people you love or your own children, and you want to share. You want to
Mhm.
shere with the people you love, and you
Yeah.
care about. And
And I
that's not a
also
bad thing,
I wanted to add really quick because, like, yeah, we've touched on, or you touched on, like, there's a really dark side of this reality of what
Mhm.
your children's photos and videos could be used for. But I think the majority of parents who are posting, I would say, are not posting with malicious intent
Right.
to
Mhm.
exploit their children. Like,
No,
that is,
not at all.
it's real and it's possible that there are parents doing that. I obviously don't believe that's the majority of the case. Like, we want to brag about our kids and like how
Yes.
funny they're being and how cute and like all these things because we just, like you were saying, we love them so much and like want to share those things. Um but sometimes it's like, okay, is it, even though I want to show off my kids and like in a way of like I want people to see how wonderful my kids are and,
Mhm.
you know, how great they are and like those sorts of things. But are the implications of things coming down the pike, possibly coming down the pike,
Mhm.
worth what it is that you're posting? And
Mhm.
I think yeah, it doesn't have to be such an extreme situation
Mhm.
for everybody's circumstances,
Yeah.
but I think there is like that side that you were talking about. Like, yes, there are parents who are posting and know that what they're posting
Mhm.
is being used for evil and wicked purposes. And
Mhm.
then there are parents who just like they love their kids and they want to talk about them and show them and like, you know, and it's all like generally very innocent. And I think there's
Yeah.
also maybe another third category of like when you're talking about like moms who may share their kids having a meltdown and this is how I deal with my kids' meltdown. And it's like, I think, yes, sometimes it can quote unquote be helpful as educational content, but I think you can get the point across just as easily describing the situation in your
Yes.
own words instead of showing it.
Mhm.
Um,
And keeping
or
the child that it happened to, keeping them anonymous.
yes, yeah. And sometimes I think it can also, and I've been guilty of this in the past when I was a very new first time mom of being like, well, this is how I did it. And like, you know, people are wondering, and I want to share my quote unquote expertise on
Mhm.
this certain subject. And it doesn't really become about like, I love my kids and I want to, you know, tell people about them. And it becomes more of a look at me and how great I'm
A
doing
braggy
at
brag.
this on yourself, which like that in and of itself is also not good
And that
anyway.
yeah, and that could end up being exploitative too,
Yes.
like for
Yeah.
your own clout, using,
Right.
a situation with your child, whether you're showing them or not, using it so that you look like this,
Mhm.
perfect mom
Yeah.
or whatever,
Yeah. And I think there are obviously ways that like for my own boundaries, like I would feel comfortable posting about my child as far as like writing something about them. I would
Mhm.
not be comfortable with um anymore showing their faces
Mhm.
on a public social media account. Um and but I would be fine with like talking about them like in a
Yeah,
caption
right.
and that sort of thing and like maybe sharing something like you were saying like if there is something that I have had to deal with a
Mhm.
child in a situation or an issue or whatever and maybe I've been asked about it or whatever it is and keeping that child anonymous. Like, I think sometimes people can sort of tell if they know your kids really
Yeah,
well, like, "Oh,
right.
they're probably talking about this." But
Yeah.
that's, like, on a very that's from people you know on a very
Yes.
personal level. You're not, like, outing your kids like, "Well, this one kid had this really tough issue and da 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 da."
Yeah.
Unless, like, I've seen, like, for an example, like, in Abby Halberstadt's book, um, she has talked about her own um situations with you know some things she's had to do to deal with different issues with her kids. And from what I remember, I think some of them were anonymous.
Yeah, the identity of the kids are very vague. Like, she'll say
Yes.
my teenager or my boys or my this and that, or she'll use the first letter or my 17-year-old. Like, she doesn't, post their whole name for you to be like, "Oh,
Yeah,
goodness,
when
that
it yeah,
person,"
at least when it comes to like, oh, they had this kid had this issue or whatever.
Mhm. She's
But
a
I
great
think
example. I remember reading even her latest book and feeling like, wow, like I really appreciate how respectful she is of her kids. And I also notice that when the kids are older teenagers, I feel like there can be some leeway of like you asking them,
Yes, that's what
are
I
you
was gonna say.
okay with me
Yes.
talking about this, this, and this, or posting about this, this, and this? And I know
Yes. And
she's done that too.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I was gonna say, like, I think she did clarify. It was either in the book or maybe in one of her podcasts or some. It was somewhere where she was like, "I did talk about one of my teenagers, like something that I had to deal with them when they were very little." And I asked them, like, "Is it okay if I share about
Hmm.
this stuff?" And they were like, "Yeah, that's fine." I mean, at that point, when you have teenagers, they're obviously cognizant enough
They're
to
more autonomous.
know
Yeah.
what, yeah, like what they want to have publicly known about them. So
Because that's
anyway,
the
it
age that
is
we started our digital footprints.
right.
Yeah.
Right, right, right. Yeah. So I think it is a lot of discerning, maybe a little bit of trial and error. And I think some parents may be like a cold turkey approach, like I'm
Hmm.
going from posting my kids to absolutely nothing at all. Like I don't want people to even know that I have children or like,
Yeah. Yeah.
that sort of thing. Or it could be, see how you do with step by step putting up more and more boundaries, seeing what feels the best for your family. And obviously, I think this goes without saying, this is like something you need to talk to your husband about
Oh,
too,
yeah.
and how
1,000%. Yeah.
he feels about your kids being online
Yeah.
in that way. So anyway, let's move on.
Yeah, action steps. So now that we've talked about the possible consequences, and again, I want to reemphasize possible. I'm not saying that your kids are going to end up on the dark web.
Yeah.
Like if you post a picture of them and it's too late and there's nothing you can do. No, that's not the case. Yes, we need to seriously examine our motives, consider the consequences to make informed decisions. So, what are those possible informed decisions? Well, Marcella talked about, not posting them at all. And I want to offer some alternatives if you would like to continue to share your kids or talk about certain things or share pictures, or if you're an adult that are entrusted in the care of kids, what you can do about those situations. And I want to offer some action steps. And Marcella, you can always jump in to add more.
Mhm.
So I have this kind of broken up into a couple different categories. The first one being what to do with public social media accounts. And again, these are suggestions, not rules, things that for you to consider. And I also want to reemphasize that you don't have to have a large following or be an influencer for these consequences to possibly happen or for you to consider
Mhm.
this, because a public social media account is still public and anybody
Mhm.
has access to it. So one thing to consider is if you'd still like to share photos of your kids, consider choosing to not show your children's face. I've seen people really artistically being able to share pictures of their kids without showing their face, like behind them or above them, or blurring, putting a heart over it. I worked in foster and adoption for a few years when I was in my early 20s, and I remember children in the foster care system, the parents would post pictures of them and they were allowed to post pictures of them, but they had to cover their face for their privacy, for their anonymity. And I really appreciated that. Something that we should think about. Another thing that I've kind of touched on is avoiding posting private or vulnerable moments. So other things that we may have not already said before is in their bathtub, tub time, showering, swimming, bathing suits, diapers, vulnerable moments, essentially. If you want to post your children, you want to post their face, you're thinking about ways that you can still respect your children's privacy. Consider, is this a vulnerable moment? Is this an inappropriate moment for me to be posting? Another thing, which I think is a really cool feature that I know Instagram has. I don't know if Facebook has it yet, or if any other social media platform has it yet. But adding a close friends feature to your Instagram account can actually help you control even more who sees those pictures. So say you have a public account, but you would like to still post pictures of your kids on your Instagram story, but you only want certain people to see those. So maybe your family members, close friends, people at church that you trust, that sort of thing. You can create a curated list of close friends, and it's called close friends, where whenever you post that story, you can press close friends, and only they will be able to see it. So that's another option. If you don't want to have a private account and you want to consider not posting your kids' faces or publicly, stuff like that, you can have a close friends account and you can post, whatever you would like there. Another option, if you have private social media accounts, I think that private social media accounts allow you to have a lot more control over who sees pictures of your kids. So if you still want to post regularly, about, your children, especially like I know in our circumstances, like our families have moved away from the place that we've grown up, and a lot of people want to keep up with you. So considering having maybe a very small private account. I know you and I have a mutual friend that we grew up with, and she had a very public account with a lot of people, and now she has a tiny under 100, I think maybe under small. 50, very small social media account.
Look if I can see.
Yes.
I know you're talking about.
Yes. Yeah. And I really appreciate it because I love her posts. I love seeing pictures of her kids.
Yeah, I love she has like under 150.
Yeah. So like she has made a fully separate account where she posts her family stuff. And even she's, cautious of what she even posts there. I don't think she posts anything that I would consider a vulnerable moment. But I really love that I can still, as a close friend of somebody that, I've loved since I was a child, that I can see now her kids grow up, even though we live far away from each other. So that's something to really consider. Private social media accounts, you have more control over them. And you can pare it down a whole lot more. And I would say if you had a public account and you've made it private, and this is what I have done recently on my Instagram, my personal account is now private. I went through every person that follows me one day, and I just like kicked out essentially a ton of people. Because, if it's people I don't know personally, people that I've never talked to or whatever, you can be a lot more picky if you have a social media account. So I would say if you have a private account, consider maybe like a quarterly or annual sweep.
Yes.
Of going through your Facebook friends, your Instagram friends, and just cleaning it out. You had something you wanted to say about that?
Yeah, I was just going to say, if it's been more than a year that you've like cleaned out your followers, and I mean, even if you're like, I don't even have that many, if I have like 50 people that follow me and that's it, go through those 50 people and like just double check. Like I think it never hurts.
Right.
Yeah.
Another thing that I didn't add on this, but I thought was really cool, is that I have met people that will send out letters with updates about their family, or even email newsletters instead of having social media. Like they would have their own social media accounts, but anything pertaining their family or their children, they would send like a monthly newsletter or a letter. And I've been a recipient of some of those, and I thought they were really creative. So if you would like to, you could even take it up a notch, from public to private to even more private, that these people you have to be able to email them or send them a letter yourself with information about, we had a new baby, or this is the milestones of this child and that sort of thing. If you want to share, this is how homeschooling is going. If you want to share things about your family, but you don't necessarily want to put them online, that's a great alternative. There are so many free ways that you can do newsletters for your direct family and friends community, stuff like that. Another thing that, even though we've been talking heavily about, you and your children, I know a lot of you listeners have children under your care, whether you watch them or you're a teacher or you have, you do social media for your church, anything like that, where you possibly take pictures of other people's children. If you are an aunt or a grandma, those sort of things, a couple things that I would put out there for you to consider. If it's more formal, like, social media accounts that you may be running or posting for, businesses or for nonprofits or extracurricular activities, media consent forms are an absolute necessity. Both Marcella and I have had media consent forms for our students, for the programs that we were a part of that involved children, everything was super like legal. And there were always families that would not like their children posted on your account if you were posting, church or that sort of thing. And it's always good to know, because you never know. There may be a family, even just for safety reasons, you never know why somebody may not want their children posted on the internet.
Mm-hmm.
Always media consent forms if it's more like a business or a more formal thing. If it's less about a business or a legal thing, if you're just a family member or a friend, asking permission, it honestly never hurts. I know sometimes it can be awkward if you're hanging out with your friends and family, or you're at a party, or you're having so much fun, and then you're taking pictures of the kids, you're taking pictures of you with the kids. And I'm an aunt. I get it. I'm taking pictures of my nephews night and day if I'm with them.
Mm-hmm.
But asking permission is always, even if you're family, and I need to say that 20 times, even if you're family, even if that is your best friend's kid, always ask permission. And I even ask permission even if I've already had permission in the past, because sometimes people change their minds.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's they may have been okay with you posting a picture of their kid that one day, but today, not today. You never know what might be going on in their lives, and they do not owe you an explanation. It is not your right to post pictures of other people's kids. So I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that.
No, you covered it pretty well.
And then I already talked about keeping vulnerable moments private. We talked about even for educational purposes, and also just considering yourself, you have had the right and the luxury as a millennial, because most of the people listening to our podcast are millennials or older. We have a few Gen Zers out there, so I haven't forgotten about you. But
I still don't know if I'm technically.
You're a zillennial.
Yeah, I don't fit into either category.
You are 90, right at the cutoff.
97 is
that's the cutoff time. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we have had the privilege of creating our own digital footprints. I think that the most respectful and the most kind thing we can do for the next generation is allow them to have that same privilege. Mm-hmm. And to really consider, I think what you said about their future that's really powerful, because again, we only think about the present so often, how cute they are, how excited we are to share, or how funny this little story is. And there are so many stories that we hear now of people not getting entrances to college, people struggling to get a job because of their online presence, whether they made it or not. And so that sort of thing, it needs to be on the back of our mind, is could this potentially backfire?
Yeah.
Or sabotage, or even something innocent? Could this possibly have implications on our children's future as adults?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I think we have to look at it more holistically. What is the big picture of everything? Do I actually think a cute picture of my baby, innocent, he's fully clothed, those sorts of things, is going to make him not be able to get a certain job later in life? Probably not. But that's not the only privacy issue that we need to think about. It is not just about what opportunities are they going to be taken from because of what I'm posting, but also I think especially I think the present concern is the safety issue. But I think the future concern is the implications of the peer circles, the I can't think of the word, career circles, that sort of a thing. So it's there's kind of two sides to it, that there are things because there are sick, twisted people out there that can use that seemingly innocent content for very disturbing things. And that I think that is the present concern mainly for why parents choose not to post about their children. And also because like we do want them to be able to like when they're older, they can post whatever pictures of themselves that they want as long as they're not sinning, posting and that sort of thing. Like that should be up to them. And I think it does give them a bit more autonomy that way. And I think another thing is that obviously we aren't trying to like fear monger you guys.
Oh, absolutely not. I don't like that. I do not like fear mongering
because like
no,
we ultimately do not have complete control over what happens to our children. So I think, we have to use discernment. We need to, maybe if you're like, I really don't know how I feel about this, seek wise counsel about it from maybe older parents, or maybe you see another parent, maybe they have more boundaries or more privacy, and you can talk to them about like, okay, well, why are you doing it that way, or whatever it may be. Obviously talking to your husband about it and getting his take, praying about it. But then like the rest of it, it's like, okay, Lord, this is all this, it's still ultimately in your hands. Like, what happens with these things. And like, I can't really think of like really specific things way back when I was consistently posting about my kids that I would look back and be like, oh my goodness, like, wow, that was a horrible thing to post. Because I think like, thankfully from pretty early on, I was fairly conscious about what I was posting. But even like after Eli was born, I wasn't posting as much. I was still posting about the kids, wasn't posting as much. And then I would say like a year and a half ago, I stopped posting pictures of their faces completely, especially on my Instagram, because it's a public account, because it's obviously affiliated with the podcast. I want people to be able to just follow me without me having to take the time to like
filter through.
Yeah. Well, obviously, if there are weirdos that are following me, I'm blocking them. Like, and I can usually tell like who is following me, not because they're interested in my biblical womanhood content, but because they're creeps. And like, I'm obviously going to block them. But like, I don't post pictures of my kids' faces on my public Instagram. And I want to keep my Instagram public because, like I said, this is a podcast. I have women that I don't know personally follow me, and I want that to be accessible. So anyway, it's another aspect to think about, that ultimately we still need to trust the Lord with what happens to our children, but we also, there's a part that we play in not being ignorant, to have no boundaries at all, and to not consider these things that could definitely have serious implications.
Yeah, very well said. Well, I think I'm done ranting about this topic. So we can go ahead and shut it down. I'm sorry if this was like a really heavy episode, but next week and the week after, it'll be a lot more lighthearted, I promise you. But these are just topics that are relevant to us, relevant to our generation, to our positions, to young moms, to wives. And it's something that we should consider and something we should think about, again, like Marcella said, not with fear, but with wisdom and discernment. So I hope you guys enjoyed today's episodes, and I hope you will talk to us on Facebook, on Patreon, and on Instagram. Let us know what you thought, if you have any thoughts or concerns, and we will talk to you guys next week. Bye.
Bye.